Welcome to MainFrame Mentally. Subscribe to our channel to learn more about psychology. My teammates and I are going to be uploading 6 different videos. In each of the videos, we're going to be covering one chapter.
Zimar Ariola here, doing chapter 1, Introduction to Psychology.
My name is Philip, and I will be presenting on research method.
Valdez, I'm going to be covering chapter 3, the biological foundations of behavior.
Hi guys, my name is Jelly Gillette and today I will be focusing on chapter 4, Nature versus Nurture.
I'm Hayward and I'm going to be covering chapter 5, Sensation and Perception.
My name is Kimar Sima and I am doing State of Consciousness.
Hey guys, welcome back to MainFrame Mentally. My name is Chelsea and today we're going to be going over chapter 3, the biological foundations of behavior. So our first main question is, why is it even important to study human biology when studying psychology? Well, there is an easier question. There's an easier answer to that question than you may think. The reason why it is vital to study human biology when studying psychology is because it helps us understand the human behavior, why they act that way, and different stuff that we need to know. So today, the stuff that we're going to be covering in this video is the nervous system, the brain, and the endocrine system. Okay, so let's get started. First, we're going to get started with the nervous system. What is the nervous system and why is it so important? Well, the nervous system is a network of fibers and nerve cells that transmits nerve impulses from different parts of the body. How does the nervous system do this? Well, the nervous system has a special kind of cell called neurons. Neurons send signals from all different parts of the body, such as the muscles, the skin. So anytime you feel a little prick or a little hurt on your body, on your skin, in your muscles, the nerves, the neurons work really hard to send those signals or messages to your brain. Believe it or not, the spinal cord plays a huge, big role in the nervous system. And the main reason for that is because the spinal cord helps connect the brain to different parts of the body. So let's take a closer look into what are neurons and what do they do. Well, neurons are the most primary units in the nervous system, and the reason for that is because they're the information messengers. I guess you can say they're the UPS of the nervous system and the body. There are 3 major parts of the neuron, which is the cell body, the dendrite, and the axon. Let's start off with the dendrite. The dendrites are long tree-like branches that extend from the cell body, and they're in charge of receiving messages from other neurons. So basically, the dendrites are in charge of receiving the messages. They get the messages. They don't send up messages, they get the messages. Let's continue with the axon. The axon are branches that are located at the end of the neuron, and they help carry messages away from the cell body and transmit them to a next neuron. So basically, keep in mind, don't never get confused with the dendrite and the axon. The dendrite receives messages. The axons carries away messages. Lastly, let's get started and do the cell body. The cell body contains the cell nucleus and other parts that are important for the cells to nourish and to be preserved. So once again, I'm going to repeat myself. Don't get confused with the dendrite and the axons. People always get that mixed up. Just remember it like this. The dendrites, they import messages, and axons export messages. When transmitting messages, there are 2 steps or 2 parts when it comes to transmitting these messages. The first one is neural transmission and the second one is synaptic transmission. Neural transmission is a transmission of messages from one end of a neuron to the next end. Synaptic transmission is the transmission of messages from one neuron to the next neuron. So if you ever get confused about, okay, I can't tell apart neural and synaptic transmission, just remember, neural transmission is domestic traveling, you could say. It's from one end of the neuron to the next. And synaptic transmission, you could say, is international traveling because you go from one neuron to the next, just as if you're going to from one country to a next country. So let me ask you a trick question. What part of the neuron both deals with neural and synaptic transmission? I'll give you time to think. Well, the answer is the axons. The axons do both neural transmission and synaptic transmission because remember, the axon helps transmit information out of the neuron and to out of the neuron and to a next neuron. So that means that it does both neural transmission and synaptic transmission. Okay, let's get into more about how does synaptic transmission occur. Well, this process occurs by the synaptic gap, which is a small little gap or space between neurons. So synaptic transmission is basically the process when two neurons communicate with each other. So there are little vesicles that are called synaptic vesicles, as you can see here in the picture, that hold millions of neurotransmitters. When something called action potential happens, that's a chemical response to, and it triggers the synaptic vesicles to let go those neurotransmitters, and the neurotransmitters then goes into the synaptic gap. Then when that happens, the neurotransmitter is caught by the receptors. Majority of the time, not all these neurotransmitters are caught into receptors, and sometimes they just will float away and they will either get caught by diffusion or other chemicals such as enzymes will break them down. So once again, the reason why the synaptic vesicle lets go of these neurotransmitters, that's when the action potential reaches it, and then they let it go into the synaptic gap, and that's when the receptors catch them, and then they repeat it all over again. Okay, let's move on from the two parts of this. Let's move on from the transmissions and whatever we're talking about, and let's get moving on with the nervous system. There are two parts of the nervous system, one being the central nervous system and the next peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system contains it's split into two other nervous systems, one being the somatic nervous system and the next being the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so let's start off with the somatic nervous system. The somatic nervous system carries messages from the central nervous system to the skeletal muscles, which controls the body movements. And the somatic nervous system has both voluntary and involuntary movement, but mainly voluntary. Lastly, they also receive messages from the sensory receptors, and then it transmits them to the central nervous system. So next, the autonomic. The autonomic nervous system is composed of nerves that carry messages to the glands and also to the visceral organs, which include the stomach, the heart, and the intestine. This system plays a huge role in both essential body functions and emotions, and this system only deals with involuntary movements. And once again, we have our next two new systems. These two new systems stems from the automatic nervous system. These new systems are the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Let's start off with the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system deals with the expenditure energy, aka the flight or fight mode. Basically, when you're running, when you're jogging, when you're playing sports. The parasympathetic nervous system has to do with the rest and digest, which means it supports activities that increases energy storage. The parasympathetic nervous system, when it says that it supports activities that increases energy storage, it means such things such as sleeping, napping, anything that has to do with relaxing, meditating, anything. So basically, sympathetic nervous system needs it when you're playing sports, when you're running, stuff like that. And the parasympathetic nervous system needs it when you're sleeping, when you're resting, when you're not using as much energy as that you would use if you're playing sports or if you're running or if you're fully awake. So here we can see we have a comparison. I'm not going to be telling you one comparison that we can see here. One of them being that for sympathetic nervous system, the heart and blood pressure increases. Just like if you're running, your heart pressure increases. Your heart rate increases, and your pressure, and your blood pressure. But on the other hand, for the parasympathetic nervous system, your heartbeat slows down. It's slower. It doesn't completely stop, obviously, because you would die if that would happen, but it stops. It slows down. It's not as fast as if you're running or if you're playing sports. Okay, guys. So now that we have finished with the nervous system, we're going to be moving on to the brain. There are three major parts of the brain: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. Let's start off with the hindbrain. The hindbrain is located in the base of the skull, and it is the lowest part of the brain. As you can see in the diagram here, in the purple, that is where the hindbrain is located. What does the hindbrain do? Well, the hindbrain, it keeps the body working in the correct way. Let's move on to the midbrain. The midbrain is a small area at the top of the hindbrain, and its main purpose is the reflex center for orientating the ears and eyes. As you can see, there's a little teal blue looking section on top of the hindbrain. That is where the midbrain is located. Next, the forebrain. The forebrain is located on the top of the hindbrain and midbrain. It is where the majority of the stuff for the brain is located. It sits over the lower part of the brain, and it is made up of the cerebral cortex. So let's get into the next section. Okay, guys, so now that we have did the main parts of the brain, we're going to dig even deeper into the brain. So we're going to be talking about the cerebral cortex. So let's get started. There are 4 parts of the lobes of the cerebral cortex, which are the frontal, the parietal, temporal, and occipital lobe. So let's get started with the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is located at the part of the skull behind the forehead, right? Extending back into the middle of the head. The main function is that it involves remembering, thinking, speaking, and making decisions. It also is in charge of predicting the future, but it also in charge of predicting future consequences of actions and controlling movements and regulating motions. So when it said that it controls the future consequences of action, it means that, okay, let's give an example. We all know, let's say we have a hot stove or a hot pan, right? If before we even touch the pan, our brain tells us, okay, if you touch the pan, you will get burned. Or if you see a nail on the ground and you be like, if I step on that nail, I will get pricked. That's basically what it means. So the frontal lobe is basically in charge of that. It is located behind the forehead, so we're exactly behind your forehead and goes back to the middle of the head. Let's move on to the other one. Okay, the next lobe we have is the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe are a part of the cerebral cortex, and it is one of the most crucial lobes. It is located behind the frontal lobe, and it sits on top of the skull. The main function of the lobe is to process sensory information such as touch, temperature, pain. A not so fun fact about this lobe is that if you damage it, it may cause long-term sensory loss. So a little bit more about this lobe, the parietal lobe. When it says, okay, so first we already learned that the frontal lobe is from the beginning of the forehead to the middle. So parietal lobe is from the middle of the forehead after the frontal lobe to a little bit behind the behind of the head, but not fully yet, because remember there's another lobe behind that, and we will learn about that lobe in a second. So, like I said again, the parietal lobe is in charge of sensory information. So it helps us learn what, like, if you feel any pain, the temperature, anything have to do with sensory. Sensory is the smell, taste, touch, etc. Feel, things like that. So let's move on to the other lobe. Next, we have the occipital lobe. As we can see here in the diagram, the little purplish part, that's occipital lobe. That is where it is. Where its home is, you could say. That's where it's located. The occipital lobe is located at the base of the back of the head. Its role is to process the sensory information from the eyes. This lobe is most important for visual areas. So first we learned that frontal lobe is in charge of thinking, making decisions, predicting. The next lobe behind that is in charge of sensory stuff, touch, feel, taste, pain, and the occipital lobe, which is in charge of sensory information, but mainly for the eye. So yeah. Now we're going to be moving on to the last lobe. Last, we have the temporal lobe. It is located behind the ears and it is the second largest lobe. This lobe is in charge of processing affects/emotions, languages, and some visual perceptions. So, as you can see once again in it here, we have the temporal lobe is in green. It's located behind the ear and it's the second biggest lobe. So first, let's go over one more time. Can you tell me where the frontal lobe is located? Correct. From behind the forehead to the middle of the head, of the skull, you could say. How about the other one? Yes, correct. It is located behind the frontal lobe to a little bit to the back of the head. And obviously, we know the occipital lobe is located to the back of the head and temporal lobe is located to the back of the ear. Good job, guys. So now we're going to move on from the brain and we're going to learn about our next system. So the last thing we're going to be learning today is going to be very short. It won't be as long as the nervous system or the brain. Is the endocrine system. We won't really dig much deep into the system because this video is mainly on the nervous system and the brain. We're still going to take a little bit deeper, we're going to touch the surface of the endocrine system. So the endocrine system, the system of glands that secrete hormones. So hormones such as the sex hormones and many other hormones that you have running through your body. They secrete two kinds of chemical messages. The first one is hormones. Hormones are chemicals produced by endocrine glands that influence internal organs. The next kind of chemical message that it secretes is in neuropeptides. Neuropeptides allow endocrine glands to communicate with each other. Some reach the brain and influence neural systems. These play a role in stress regulation, social bonding, and memory. So once again, it was just a tip on the surface of what the endocrine system do. Now let's move on and we're going to show you a quick little picture of the endocrine system and different stuffs. Okay guys, so here's just a short little diagram about some glands that are and some parts of our body, parts of our body that are included in the endocrine system. Obviously there are many more deeper parts, like I said again, but we're just going to touch the surface for the endocrine system. So here we have some examples. We have the pancreas, we have the ovaries, because like I said again, ovaries help excrete hormones for women, as we all may know. That is why it is so important to learn about human biology when studying psychology, because things such as hormone play a major role in how we act and how we go about our day. Okay guys, and we're all done. That finally wraps up our presentation for today and our video. Thank you so much for choosing MainFrame Mentally for your psychological studies or whatever you're watching this for. Thank you so much. Please give a like and subscribe and have a blessed day, and look forward for our next video on chapter 4. Thank you. Bye.